Cook flavorful meals, my boyfriend orders fast food, and amidst debates on food and values, I question our future together. I've always taken pride in my cooking. I have kids, and they eat my food happily. At family gatherings and church events, I'm always the one everyone wants in the kitchen. My dishes are devoured with smiles all around. So, when I moved in with my boyfriend a few months ago, I figured cooking together would be another joy to share. I couldn't have been more wrong. Every day, it's like there's a new set of rules. Whenever I try something different, he'll have a new reason it's not right. If he had chicken for lunch, chicken is now completely off the menu for dinner. If I make pork chops, somehow he's not in the mood. If I put time and care into something special, he'll just sigh and say, I don't know, it's missing something. He flat out refuses to eat onions, tomatoes, fish, or anything remotely resembling Asian food. Most vegetables are off the table, with broccoli as a rare exception. For dessert, only vanilla ice cream will do. He won't touch anything that's been reheated in the microwave, which makes leftovers a lost cause. He turns up his nose at corn. It honestly feels endless. I grew up a bit old school. I believe in being a good partner, and a big part of that, to me, is feeding the people I love. But he can't really cook at all, and his favorite meal is, of all things, hamburger helper. A part of me wonders if this is all rooted in how he grew up, but I can't deny how frustrating this is. The worst part is, sometimes, after I've put effort into a home-cooked meal, he'll just order Jack in the Box. And sure, he apologizes. He's never cruel about it. In fact, he seems genuinely sorry. But that doesn't take the sting out of it. It just sucks. I started taking pictures of the meals he rejects: boneless pork chops, casseroles, all the stuff the kids eat without complaint, almost like I need proof that the problem isn't my cooking. I'll admit it, with everything on my plate, I've cut a few corners. I work full-time, plus I commute a total of 2 hours each day. I go to school remotely. The house and the kids demand attention. Some days, paper plates are the only way I can keep afloat. It's not my proudest habit, but it's how I manage. Still, he expects me to cook for him. I make dinner every single night, and on weekends, I handle his lunch, too. He won't eat breakfast and won't take a packed lunch to work, instead buying fast food during the week. I find myself making 2 separate meals some nights, one for him, another for the rest of us, because I simply refuse to make the kids eat the same bland, repetitive meals he prefers. There have been moments where I've wondered if there's more to all of this. He hasn't been diagnosed with ASD, ADHD, or ARFID, but I'm not ruling anything out anymore. And it's not just food where we butt heads. We've had our fair share of heated debates over his values, too. He grew up in small-town Texas, handed a set of beliefs I couldn't just ignore. I told him, honestly, that if he couldn't talk about these things with me, it'd be a deal-breaker, maybe even if he could. At first, the conversations were rough. He was defensive, hurt that I'd even suggest he wasn't kind or compassionate. But I stood my ground. I pointed out the real-life impacts of policies, showed him evidence, and dragged him into deep dives on immigration, justice, and more. He began to question what he'd been taught as gospel. Politics isn't the forbidden topic it used to be between us. Now we talk about these things openly, and he's even changed his mind about some stuff. It hasn't been easy, getting here. But whether it's in the kitchen or in a conversation about the world, I want a partner who's willing to grow. And right now, I'm just not sure how much further I can be stretched to accommodate someone else's stubbornness, especially when my choices are greeted with a drive-through bag and an apology. Update 1. I can feel that things are beginning to shift between us. Even taking the step to acknowledge it, to get these thoughts out, was a clear sign to myself that I'm not okay with how things have been. I've always seen myself as a patient person, someone who can let things slide, but last night was different. I made him chili dogs and fries, one of the few meals he will consistently eat. At the same time, I was cooking something completely different for the kids, something I knew he wouldn't touch. When I brought him his plate, he looked at me and said, "You're not going to believe this, but I had chili dogs for lunch." Without thinking, I blurted out, "I don't care." The words just came out. We both froze for a moment, completely surprised. Honestly, I was just as shocked as he was. I turned around and went straight back to the kitchen, stunned at what I had just said. Update 2. This was some tough love, and honestly, I'm grateful for it. What began as me just venting in my kitchen, letting my thoughts spill out into the void, turned into something I never expected. Through all of this, I realized there are so many things I believed were normal that, it turns out, might not be normal at all. I've decided to start therapy. Luckily, it's fully covered through my job, and I truly think it'll help to have a sane adult to talk with about everything. Maybe it's not the giant leap some people would want me to make right now, but I have to admit, I don't trust myself completely to jump into any big decisions just yet. I just wanted to take a moment to say, thank you. I really did read what you said, and it made a difference for me. Update 3. I'm still trying to sort out what to do next. I want to make the right decision with a cool head, not in the heat of emotion. But I'll be honest, I can feel myself leaning in a certain direction more every day. Tonight, something small but significant happened. I set his plate in front of him as usual, but instead of eating, he just stared at it for a minute. Then, without a word, he got up and took it back to the kitchen. He came back with some chips instead. I looked at him and asked, Not good? He just said, no. Normally, I might have jumped up and offered to make him something else, or at least asked what was wrong with it. But this time, I just said, oh, okay, shrugged, and went back to my own dinner. I could see that shook him a little. He's not used to me being so nonchalant about his reaction. It's a small thing, but I feel like something has shifted inside me. My mindset is changing. I can feel it. For so long I've tried to keep the peace, always working so hard to please and accommodate, but tonight I just let it go. I know it might sound pathetic, but I don't really have any grown-up friends to talk to about these things. I've been grateful for the encouragement and genuinely good advice I've found lately. It's helped me clear the fog a little and start believing I don't have to bend over backwards all the time. Even just typing this out makes me feel a little less alone with these thoughts. Update 4. About a month ago, I found myself standing over a stovetop, disappointed and hurt because my boyfriend refused to eat the pork chops I had cooked for dinner. I couldn't figure out what had gone wrong. Was it me, the food, or something deeper? I spent days turning it over in my mind, questioning myself, picking apart my cooking and my relationship. Tonight, I made pork chops again, but this time, he won't be here to refuse them. We broke up. He moved out. And to my surprise, I feel lighter, freer, just so much better off. It's like a veil has lifted. I had no idea how much weight I was carrying until I let him go. As I sat down to my meal, a smile crept across my face. The pork chops looked exactly the way I'd always wanted them to, crispy, golden, delicious. The yellow stuff beside them? That's just smashed potatoes with melted cheese on top, a detail the kids insisted on. And that pat of butter on the broccoli? It melted into glossy perfection right after I snapped a picture, I swear. I wish I could invite you all over to enjoy this meal with me. The kindness and wisdom I've received lately have opened my eyes. This dinner isn't just about the food, it's about reclaiming my space, my meals, and my happiness. For those curious about how I made my pork chops tonight, let me share my simple, not so fancy method. I take the pork chops out of the fridge 30 minutes before cooking so they reach room temperature, salting them right away. Then, I mix up some flour with seasonings, this time, salt, pepper, onion powder, garlic powder, and chili powder. I dredge the chops in the seasoned flour before frying them in a little oil on medium-high heat, 2 or 3 minutes per side for some beautiful color. After that, I drop the heat to low, put a lid on the pan, and cook until a meat thermometer reads 145 degrees Fahrenheit inside. I take them off the heat and let them rest, covered, for 3 to 5 minutes. The smashed potatoes are a household favorite. I boil them in salted water until they're fully cooked, then oil a baking sheet and smash each potato with a masher, not mashed, just smashed once or twice. I drizzle them with olive oil, season however I like, and bake them in a blisteringly hot oven, 425 or even 450 degrees, until they're crispy and golden, about 10 or 15 minutes while keeping a close eye on them. At the kids' request, I scatter cheese on top just a few minutes before pulling them out of the oven. Tonight, as I enjoyed my dinner, flavors singing, butter melting, cheese bubbling, I realized I'm more than okay. I'm thriving. Update 5. I had my first therapy session on Tuesday. The therapist asked me one question that stuck in my ribs all the way home. What would you cook if no one got to correct you? I didn't even have to think. I said, onions. Tomatoes. Fish. I laughed when I heard myself say it out loud. On the way back, I stopped at the store. I stood in the produce section like I hadn't been there 1,000 times, breathing in that green, damp smell and dropping sweet little tomatoes into a bag until it felt almost silly. At the fish counter I pointed at a bright, silvery salmon fillet and felt a quiver of nerves like I was committing a tiny crime just by nodding yes to the weight on the scale. The kids were thrilled. They asked a million questions and I answered all of them, even the ones that should have been obvious. I told them we were having a banned foods banquet on Friday. They thought I was being dramatic in the funniest way and immediately started brainstorming decorations made out of onion skins and broccoli stems like we were planning a parade. I texted my neighbor across the hall, the one who always brings over a slice of pound cake when she bakes. She said she'd come and she'd bring her appetite. Friday, I came home humming. I put music on low and opened the windows. I sliced a yellow onion and it released that first sharp, sweet sting that catches in your throat, and I swear my eyes watered from joy before the sulfur even had a chance. The onions went into the pan with a glug of oil and a little salt, and I let them sigh and slump into themselves until they were floppy and golden at the edges. I salted the salmon and patted it very dry, skin side down in a pan that was honestly a little too hot, but I didn't back away. The skin puffed and crackled and the whole kitchen smelled like the ocean and butter. I halved the tomatoes and tossed them with vinegar and pepper and just a whisper of sugar, and they burst a little in the bowl and made their own dressing. Someone knocked and it was my neighbor with a bottle of something sparkly and non-alcoholic and a grin. I handed her a taste of onion straight from the spoon. She rolled her eyes to the ceiling and said, "Oh, honey," and it pulled a laugh straight up out of me. The kids set the table with the confidence of two people who have strong opinions about napkin placement and no experience in being wrong. I reheated last night's rice in the microwave, just because I could, and then threw it in a screaming hot skillet with scallions and a splash of soy sauce until it sang. The microwave dinged and nobody flinched. I didn't apologize for it. I didn't explain it. It was a small thrill, private and huge at the same time. Dinner was noisy in the way I haven't heard this apartment be in a long time. Forks clinked. Chairs scraped. My neighbor told the kids a story about riding a bus across the state with a hat box and a thermos of soup, and they listened like she was reading them a treasure map. The salmon skin shattered when you cut it, and the inside was satin. The tomatoes were bright and honest, the onions tasted like patience, and the rice was the kind of salty that makes you take a breath and then go back for more. I made dessert that wasn't vanilla, and nobody asked where the vanilla was. Nobody asked anything except for seconds. Halfway through the meal, my phone lit up face down on the counter. His name, once, and then again a minute later. A third time with a little preview of a paragraph I didn't read. I wiped my hands, turned the phone off, and slid it into the drawer with the can opener. I walked back to the table and pressed my spoon into the side of a tomato and it burst, and a little juice splashed my wrist. It felt like a blessing. The fire alarm decided to get involved during the second batch of fish, because of course it did, and the kids flew into action, waving dish towels under it like they were auditioning for a musical about kitchen ventilation. Our neighbor stood under the detector with a magazine and I yanked the pan off the heat and laughed until my stomach hurt. The noise cut off. We ate by candlelight for a few minutes just because we could. It wasn't fancy. It felt like a celebration anyway. When everyone left, the apartment was warm and smelled like onions and lemon. I washed the last plate and stacked it upside down to dry. My phone stayed where I'd left it. I opened the fridge and ate a cold spoonful of rice straight from the container, right into the soft blue light, and it was perfect. I closed the door and leaned on it for a second and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd made a meal and then let it end without defending any part of it. He texted again in the morning asking if he could come by for a box he forgot in the hall closet. I told him to give me a time. When he showed up, he had a paper bag from Jack in the Box in his hand out of habit or nerves or muscle memory. He said, "These are for you and the kids, like a peace offering." I stood there in my robe and said, "We're good," and pointed him to the hall. He looked at the counter like he expected to see takeout containers and then looked at the stove, which still had the pan from the salmon on it, skin stuck to the surface like lacquer. He opened his mouth and closed it. He took his box and left. I locked the door behind him and slid the chain without thinking. After lunch today, I wrote down what my therapist had asked me and taped it on the inside of the pantry door. Not as a rule, just as a reminder. Then I sat on the floor with the kids and ate tomatoes out of the bowl with our fingers, and it occurred to me that for the first time in a long time, my kitchen feels like mine again. I can hear it in the way our voices bounce off the cabinets. I can taste it in the onions. I can feel it in the quiet after the sink stops dripping and the house takes a breath. Update 6. The power went out at 5:12 on a Thursday like somebody had flipped a coin against the sky and lost. Rain hit the windows sideways, the kind that makes cars look like they're breathing. The hallway lit up in emergency red and the building did this long low groan like an old dog shifting in its sleep. I watched the fridge blink off and pictured everything inside it timing me like an unfair game show. The kids were already at the door with their shoes half on, peeking into the hall like raccoons. My neighbor appeared with a candle in a jelly jar and a grin like she'd just been given permission to misbehave. "Courtyard?" she said. I said, "Courtyard." By the time we got downstairs, the storm had stepped back into a quiet sulk and the courtyard was a wet square of concrete that smelled like pennies and cut grass. Someone had dragged the charcoal grill out from under its cover. Somebody else had lugged down a card table with a floral cloth that didn't mind the rain. People emerged holding strange offerings like we'd been called by an invisible bell, a pack of hot dogs, 2 steaks forgotten in a freezer, a half bag of frozen shrimp going soft, 3 zucchini, a tub of hummus, a lonely head of garlic, limes, a bag of corn on the cob like sunshine you had to unwrap. I said, "Bring me your almosts," before I could stop myself. I rubbed the grill grates down with an oil-slicked paper towel and sparked a pile of charcoal like I knew what I was doing. Heat arrived as a fact. Someone put a speaker down on a chair and set it whispering Old Soul so the bass was more a feeling than a sound. The kids chalked an arrow on the wet ground, "Tonight only, downstairs cafe." I smashed garlic with the bottom of a jar and scraped it into a bowl with soft butter and the smallest clink of anchovy from a tin, the kind of thing I wouldn't let myself buy a month ago. I squeezed a lime into it with my fingers and a seed hit my wrist and stuck there like glitter. I blistered the corn in their husks and then peeled them back and rolled them in the anchovy butter until it slicked and disappeared and left only this deep, salty rightness. I sprinkled chili powder and one of the kids said the cobs looked like fireworks that forgot their manners. The shrimp went into a mixing bowl with oil and whatever I grabbed with my eyes closed, smoked paprika, a squeeze of ketchup because we didn't have tomato paste, a spoonful of mayonnaise because the gods of char love fat. I threaded them onto skewers with lemon slices and they hissed on the grill and turned pink like a blush you're proud of. A guy from 3B slid over like a backup dancer and threw down the steaks with the confidence of a person who believes in high heat and salt and not much else. The zucchini got ridges like a fingerprint and tasted great only because I didn't overthink them for once in my life. We made a bowl of something by committee, chickpeas from someone's pantry, chopped cucumber, the last fistful of cherry tomatoes, a shower of dill that looked like green confetti and made the air smell like a cold porch. I tore a heel of bread into pieces and rubbed each piece on a cut clove of garlic, then charred the bread until it wore little scorch marks like jewelry. The kids argued about whether to call it panzanella or salad with hunks, and I didn't correct anyone. I didn't correct anything. I just bent my ear to the sizzle and followed it. A lady I'd only ever nodded to at the mailboxes produced a Tupperware of pickled red onions and plucked a strand out for me with her fingers like a dare. I wrapped it around a bite of steak and honestly had to shut my eyes for a second because it was that good. The acid cut right through the fat and turned it into something mapped and lit. My neighbor smacked the table with her palm and said, "That's it," and a laugh shot out of me without asking permission. The fire alarm in the hallway coughed like it wanted to participate and then thought better of it. Someone from 2A cracked open a box of popsicles, sweating themselves into a mess, and we passed them around like communion. The kids got stripes down their wrists and bright tongues. I took a bite of mango and it chilled my molars, and I didn't think once about the stickiness or the cleanup or where the paper bag for trash was. The rain hung in the trees like Christmas lights someone forgot to turn off. Halfway through, my phone buzzed deep in my pocket. I didn't look. The shrimp needed turning. The corn asked for more butter. A man with a baby strapped to his chest said, "What is that smell?" And I said with the drama it deserved, "Anchovy," and he blinked and said, "No way," and then took one bite and turned and said to the person behind him, "Way." The X appeared in my head for exactly long enough for me to realize I'd gone an hour without him showing up there at all. The part of my brain that used to practice apologies had nothing to do, so it started dancing with the music instead. When the last charcoal gave up, we ate the edges, those crispy stray bits that feel like gifts. Somebody poured a little wine into plastic cups. Somebody else handed my neighbor a metal skewer and she used it like a wand to point out where we'd missed a shrimp. The kids set up an impromptu rating system with chalk and declared the grilled bread illegal and the corn a yes. A boy I didn't recognize asked me how to know when shrimp are done, and I said, "When they curl into a C for cooked. If they make an O, they're overdone," and he nodded like I'd told him a spell. I realized I believed myself. The power snapped back on the way a room inhales after a joke lands. Windows lit up all around us, square by square, like a grid of polite fireflies. The microwave in my kitchen would be blinking 12 o'clock again, but I didn't hurry to fix it. We sat in the clean dark of the courtyard for a few more minutes and let the crickets finish their thought. Back upstairs, the apartment smelled like rain and smoke and lime. The kids took baths with grass bits clinging to their ankles. I washed my hands and the scent of garlic refused to leave my skin, and I was glad. I opened the pantry for a towel and saw the paper I'd taped up. "What would you cook if no one got to correct you?" Spattered now with a fleck of anchovy butter that made it look like it had been kissed on purpose. I wrote underneath it, small and quick, "Who gets a seat at your table?" And answered myself without thinking, "People who bring their own appetite." I finally checked my phone. A text from him, hours old, said he'd been thinking. I put the phone face down on the counter. I pulled a rib of cold corn from a plate and ate it with my fingers over the sink in the half-light, mayonnaise streaking my thumb, and I smiled at absolutely no one. We went to bed with the windows cracked and the building still holding the hum of a party somewhere inside its cinder blocks. I could feel it in my bones, that soft, shared fullness you get when everyone has eaten enough and exactly what they wanted, even the things they didn't know to ask for. The house took a breath, and this time, my breath matched it. Update 7. The table showed up on a Saturday like a dog that picked me. Someone had set it by the dumpster with a free sign made from a torn cereal box, and even under the scuffs it had good bones, the kind of legs that look carved by a person with opinions. The kids were on scooters and circled it like sharks, yelling dibs on the side with the least scratches. My neighbor came down in her slippers, peered under the leaf, and said, "If that thing could talk," like she'd already decided it did. We carried it up the stairs like a couch through a sitcom, bumping into walls and laughing when it bit our knuckles. It barely fit through the apartment door, and then it was in my kitchen like a third presence, too big and perfect. The drawer stuck when I tried it. I jiggled, swore softly, jiggled again. It gave in all at once and dumped a memory into my lap. A little snow of flour dust I didn't put there, a paper clip, 2 rubber bands hardened into the shape of themselves, and a stack of index cards bound with twine. Someone's handwriting ran downhill and then back up again. Tomato pie. Company chicken. Cold oven pound cake. Deviled eggs, no pickles, Brenda. Onion jam, yes it's worth it. I sat on the floor and read them like letters from a friend I somehow knew. By noon I'd made up my mind, tomato pie or nothing. The kids rolled their eyes in a way that meant, "Can we help?" We went to the market and came home with tomatoes that smelled like sun even in the shade of a paper bag. I salted the slices on a wire rack and they wept a little onto the counter, and I didn't apologize to the mess, just slid a dish towel underneath like I meant it. I rolled a crust with a wine bottle because I still don't own a pin and pressed it into a pan that didn't match anything else I own. A smear of mustard on the bottom because the card said secret in parentheses next to it, and who am I to argue with a stranger I trust? I caramelized an onion until it remembered it was sweet and scattered it over the crust like confetti only I'd earned. I dotted the whole thing with spoonfuls of a quick cheese mayo thing that sounded wrong and tasted like winning. A handful of basil that I pinched with my fingers because the scissors were in the other room and I was not leaving the dance. The oven hummed. The apartment warmed up. The table sat there, listening. I texted the neighbor and 3B and the lady with the pickled onions and the guy with the baby whose name I still don't know. I said, "Bring your appetite and a fork if you have a favorite one." The kids made place cards that said things like Tony. And baby boss and pickle lady and one that just said late. My neighbor showed up early with a bouquet of herbs that looked like a haircut and the kind of gossip that lands soft and leaves no bruise. I polished my good fork, she said, and did a little bow. Halfway through the bake I nearly cried at the smell. It was August in a room with a fan that needs oil. It was a porch swing I never had creaking under the weight of two adults with a secret. It was ketchup and church and bare feet and 1,000 kitchens I've never stood in. I pressed down on the crust with the back of a spoon when it bubbled and told it, settle, like it was a baby in a bad mood. The top went the color of a sunburn you won't regret until Tuesday. I pulled it in the whole pie side. We ate hot slices that didn't hold their shape and didn't have to. The tomatoes slid and made rivers that bread wanted to dam. Someone said, Lord, with no audience. The baby boss banged his spoon and achieved a tomato mustache that looked both opinionated and wise. 3B brought collards he'd cooked low and slow with a ham hock like a love letter, and I tucked a ribbon of onion jam from the card under a bite and it changed my mind about what the best thing at the table could be 3 times in one mouthful. I handed the lady from the mailboxes the recipe for pickled onions like I was returning a library book and she tucked it into her pocket and patted it twice like a very small pet. My phone buzzed against the fruit bowl once, then again. I slid it under the couch with my foot like a misbehaving cat. The table took a water ring like a badge. The kids pulled their chairs so close their knees banged the underside and they didn't care. We voted that the knife marks belonged to a person who yelled dinner. And meant it. My neighbor tapped one scar with her finger and said it looked like the state of Tennessee and then she squinted and said, or a fish, and we laughed at the idea that two things could be true. When the pie plate showed more metal than food, I rapped my knuckles on the table just to hear the sound. A deep, good knock like yes. Someone wrote these for us, one of the kids said with a tomato seed on her cheek like a freckle. I said, then we'll write back. After everyone left, I wiped the table with a damp cloth and it raised its grain like goosebumps under my hand. The drawer stuck again. This time I let it. I cut one index card in half and wrote, careful and quick, tomato pie, with all the things I did and all the things I didn't, and at the bottom, make it when you're brave, or make it so you remember you are. I slipped it under the twine with the others like tucking a note into a coat before you give it away. On another scrap I wrote cold oven pound cake because of the way the words felt in my mouth, even if I hadn't made it yet. I tucked it behind it like a promise to next week me. The knock at the door was polite and wrong. I knew the rhythm before I stood up. He had a cardboard box in his arms and the careful expression of a person who thinks saying I'll be quick makes them smaller. I opened the door just enough for the box in our eyes. He handed me the key I had given him with a sound like coins in a swear jar. The apartment behind me smelled like basil and cheese and summer pretending to be permanent. He looked past me, at the table that wasn't his, at a pie pan that didn't wait for him, at a chair he used to sit in that had someone else's napkin on it. It smells good, he said, like a compliment he had to borrow. I said, it is, and didn't move. He nodded, the kind that means a thing is true whether you agree with it or not, and walked back down the hall with his box making the small cardboard squeal that says you're carrying more than weight. I locked the door and leaned my forehead against the cool wood for 1 second, the holy length of a breath, and then went back to my kitchen because that's where I live. Before bed I reached into the drawer and the cards bit me in that nice paper way and I laughed at myself, alone in a room with a table. I got a pen and went to the pantry door. Under what would you cook if no one got to correct you? And who gets a seat at your table? I wrote, what do you keep when the doorbell rings? And the answer came fast like heat, my menu. Update 8. The note I taped by the mailboxes was bossy and polite at the same time, the way a church lady tells you to sit while already pulling out a chair. Found, stack of recipe cards tied with twine. Old handwriting, opinionated margins. If they're yours, I'm in 4D. If they're not yours but you can't help yourself, I'm still in 4D. Bring a story. I pictured nobody coming and all the somebodies did. Not at once, but in that hopscotch way a building moves, 2 knuckle raps while I was elbow deep in dishwater, a shadow in the peephole, a voice through the wood, you the card girl? She was lipstick red where it counted and sensible shoes where it didn't. I'm Brenda, she said, and then with the timing of someone who's been her own punchline so long it's become biography, and I do not like pickles. I laughed out loud in a way that felt like a sneeze. I pulled the drawer and set the bundle down. She put her palm on the top card like a minister blessing the sick. Well I'll be, she said softly. Margie's hand. She called a number from memory I haven't had time to copy down since and put it on speaker. Dottie, she said, you remember the table you gave to Wayne and Wayne gave to the first fool who would carry it? The one Mama kept the cards in? A woman on the other end said, Lord, Brenda, it's too early in the day for me to feel sentimental. And then, is it safe? Baby, it's being used, Brenda said with a look at my stove like she was measuring my soul by the pots I owned. Good, Dottie said. Then it's in the right place. And then she laughed like a screen door and said, tell her to keep the cards, long as she cooks from them, they belong to her. We put the phone on the table and it hummed a little with the line, the way a cat pretends it's not watching you. Y'all want cake? I asked, and my mouth said it before my head checked with the clock. What kind? Brenda said, which told me she'd already said yes. The cold oven one, I pointed to the card with margarine fingerprints visible like a map. Oh, she said, drawing it out like a secret. That one asks if you can listen. We softened butter on a saucer set like a little pool under the window. Brenda stood at my elbow and tapped the mixer bowl with a spoon when my patience tried to skip ahead. No, baby, we're making air, she said, and we did, sugar-creamed until it went from yellow to almost white, an audible shift like a hum clearing its throat. Eggs went in one at a time like polite guests, flour, salt, and that stubborn little cloud of baking powder sifted because the card said so and because sometimes saying so is enough. I greased the pan like I meant it, every curve a promise. We poured the batter heavy and silk into the tube pan and smoothed it like bedsheets you're about to mess up anyway. Now, Brenda said, tapping the line that always felt like a dare, none of this preheat foolishness. Put it in cold and walk away nice. The oven door closed with that old confession booth sound it makes in my head. We didn't walk far. The kids set a timer and then 10 more, because they believe in redundancy as a concept. My neighbor came with coffee in a travel mug and sat down like her day had been waiting for a chair. The man from 3B popped his head in and told us his name is Anthony, not Tony, which we decided was fine and immediately ignored. The lady from the mailboxes knocked, too, clutching a paper bag of blueberries she'd rinsed in her strainer until they ran so clean the drips looked like beads. We told stories to keep our hands off the oven door like it was a newborn. Brenda talked about Margie's wedding where this cake wore strawberries and a veil of powdered sugar in a bowl grating that went way too far because Ida got carried away. My neighbor told about a time she overbeat cakes for a bake sale and sold them anyway by calling them cookies. The kids debated name rights for the baby, not ours, in 3B until Anthony said, "We already signed the form," and they said, "We'll allow it," and he went home and came back with the baby strapped to his chest and a smile he borrowed from somebody well-rested. The smell arrived like a person you can tell the truth to. Butter and sugar and the side of your tongue nutty thing that tells you flour can be more than glue if it gets enough heat and attention. I put my ear to the oven door just to hear it think. The top split exactly where you hope it will, that canyon that reads like a palm line. We turned on the oven light and watched, but we didn't open the door because I'm learning desire is not the same as need. When the time came, Brenda said, "Amen," and I said, "Lift," and the pan came out carrying a sun in the right shape. We let it sit. This cake wants you to know waiting is part of eating. We ran a thin knife around the sides and I could feel the release like a tight jaw unclenching. We flipped it onto a rack with a thump that said, "You did that." Steam lifted off like a spirit that was only ever meant to stick around for the hard part. We cut warm slices though we were warned not to, because sometimes ruin tastes like blessing anyway. The crust cracked along the sugar line and the inside was a fine crumb that clung just enough to your fork to feel like attention. Blueberries on top bled their little blue brews onto the plate. Someone said something about lemon glaze and then nobody fetched a lemon because we were busy having what we had. A neighbor I'd never seen without headphones stuck his head in like a raccoon in daylight and I handed him a plate and he said, "I don't even like cake," with his mouth already full. My phone, face down, thumped once and then, insistent as a fly, again. It was just me and the choice. I wiped my hands, walked to the drawer, slid the phone out like a book and read his name steady as a street sign. A paragraph stacked under it like a threat pretending to be a promise. Something in me got very quiet the way it does before a pot that's about to boil makes its last sensible noise. I typed without asking anyone's permission. "Please don't contact me anymore. Do not come by, there isn't anything left here for you. I wish you well." Then I blocked the number and put the phone back with the can opener like a tool I don't have to use today. The house did not collapse. The cake did not fall. Brenda put her hand around my wrist where the pulse hides and gave it 2 beats with her thumb like a yes. The kids started a game called Restaurant where one of them writes the check out to people who were brave and the other one folds napkins into shapes that look like bad swans and nobody complains. Anthony's baby slept through the whole event like he'd been here for all our dinners in some other life and was bored with the plot. After the plates showed more crumbs than anything else, I pulled the drawer and slid out a fresh index card. My handwriting isn't Margie's, but it's mine on purpose. Cold oven pound cake, I wrote, and then exactly how long the butter took to forget it was cold under my window today, exactly when I could smell the sugar turn honest, and, in the corner I added, "You don't have to peek to make sure something is loving you back." The table took another water ring and didn't mind at all. Later, when the heat had finally wandered off and the kids were in their beds making bargains with sleep, I stood in the pantry with my marker and the wall that is more mine now than any room I've ever had. Under "What would you cook if no one got to correct you? And who gets a seat at your table? And what do you keep when the doorbell rings?" I wrote, "What do you refuse to carry to the next kitchen?" The answer wrote itself in the same hand that creamed butter until it sang, "Apologies I do not owe." I turned off the light and the paper with my questions glowed in the dark not at all, which felt exactly right, because the answers live in the kitchen where the lights are on and the oven is warm and someone's laughing because the cake decided we got it right today.